Boots 187 eröffnet Burger.
Besides,
I don't think
how in
that's
the
true,
world?
actually, because if you say there are very few
Yeah, but what do
mathematical
you know about it?
Well, next year I'm going to be a fellow at Oxford University, so I spend time talking to academics. I've talked to a lot of academics for my book. I do agree.
Everywhere you look.
The rules.
I don't know.
Alright, so as of today, I've officially stopped barbell squatting, and that is because I'm switching exclusively to hack squats for the time being. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with barbell squats.
Squatting. Squatting's like a special place. A special place you go, and it's like where nobody else goes sometimes. In order to really get big legs, you have to squat. In order to achieve your full bodybuilding potential, you have to squat. It's like the ultimate. You know, you want a genuflect here. This is where life and death pass in front of your eyes. You've got to give it that much and demand that much. And when you do, the nice thing about when you do demand that much, you grow. I love this part of home. This is my home. Welcome to the pain zone. That's where I live. There are really two
Agree with you. There is
Look, that's all you.
such as an illiberal strain that is sweeping through a lot of universities. I don't think it's an existential threat, and I certainly don't think it is, to me, the biggest issue in world politics today. It's the one that I would choose personally.
What do you think is the biggest issue?
I think that the rise of strongmen, authoritarians around the world is very worrying, and that's one of the reasons that I find the subtitle of your book
It is very
fascinating.
worrying.
Observe.
Because it's called An Antidote to Chaos. Why isn't it an antidote to order, which you also say in its excessive manifestations is bad?
I've said that. Well, you can't write a book about everything.
No, but you've specifically chosen Antidote to Chaos. So
Yeah,
why is
I also
chaos
have
the big...
300 lectures online, and I talk plenty about the pathology of order in those lectures.
Okay, but
so
I'm just
I'm
saying...
no fan of authoritarian strongmen, that's for sure.
Well, that's good, but I do think that the way that you talk about order in the book is something that people will take away from it.
Be specific.
Okay, so let me think. The way that you talk about natural dominance hierarchies in lobsters. Let's get on to the
Today we'll go.
lobsters, because I think that the thing that people take away from that is male lobsters compete for female lobsters, and that says something about society now, that men need to be dominant in society, because if lobsters do it, then there is something that we can read about humans from
There's
that too.
nothing in that chapter at all that suggests that the way that men should succeed in human hierarchies is a consequence of the exercise of power. There's not one line in that entire book that claims that, because it's not what I believe. Most human hierarchies, as I already pointed out, are hierarchies of competence, not power.
Okay, so tell
That's
me,
why we don't live in a patriarchal tyranny. And so if you want to be a successful man, then you should be competent, and that will move you up the hierarchy. and that will make you attractive, and for good reason, unless you want an incompetent mate, which is possible and happens, but isn't something that I would recommend. People will sometimes choose an incompetent mate because they're intimidated by competence, and so they'll settle for someone who they don't respect because they feel that they can master them and they won't be intimidated. But it's not a recipe for a happy life, I can tell you that. So there isn't a line in that chapter that talks about power as the proper means of conducting yourself in life. There's not a line in the book, and there's nothing in anything I've ever said that suggests that.
Okay, no,
But it's really important because people have read this chapter and they make exactly the argument that you make. And it's a misapprehension. So it's a misapprehension of the book.
Okay, but if so many people are getting the same misapprehension, could it be
There
possible?
aren't so many people that are getting it. There's 2 million people that have bought the book, and there's a very small handful of people who have a particular ideological perspective who enjoy developing that perspective because it indicates just what sort of reprehensible individual I am. But it has absolutely nothing to do with what I wrote or what I've said or what I believe. I don't believe that our fundamental hierarchies are based on power. I don't believe that the way that you move up our hierarchies is as a consequence of manifesting power. It's competence.
Okay, my big problem with the lobsters is that it's scientifically bollocks, right? It's just, you cannot read across from lobsters and what they do to what humans do.
Of course you can. That's why serotonin works on lobsters.
But it works in 2 different ways. So serotonin makes lobsters more aggressive, it makes humans
it makes them more
less
dominant.
aggressive, right? That's
No,
what happens.
that's not right.
That
Serotonin makes human beings more dominant but less aggressive. And the only reason it makes them more dominant is because they're less irritable and they're less defensively aggressive. So it's not bollocks. I know my neurochemistry. So if you're going to play neurochemistry, let's go and do it.
Okay, well you say antidepressants work on lobsters.
Yes, they do. They make a lobster that's been defeated in a fight more likely to fight again.
That's not the same mechanism that
It's the
happens
same
in
mechanism.
humans,
Yes,
because
it is.
lobsters
It's the
don't
same
get
mechanism.
depressed as the way that humans are. I think you're anthropomorphizing into a ridiculous degree. These are
I think
creatures that urinate out of their faces.
I think that the fundamental issue among knowledgeable animal behaviorists is that anthropomorphization with animals is generally the appropriate tactic unless you have reason to doubt it, which is because there's continuity. Behavioralization of animals is inappropriate, is something derived from 1950s behaviorism. The highly trained affective neuroscientists and people who study motivation and emotion as well as neurochemistry know perfectly well that there is biological and behavioral continuity across the animal kingdom and way down into the kingdom as well, which is exactly why I chose lobsters, to indicate that there is so much continuity in the systems that allow us to estimate status position that we share it with creatures that are 1/3 of a billion years old. And the reason that I made that argument was to put paid at least in part to the absurd Marxist proposition that hierarchical structures are a secondary consequence of Western civilization and free market economies, which is as preposterous a perspective as you could possibly develop about anything. Hierarchies are 1/3 of a billion years old. You can't blame them on the West or men or capitalism. And we're wired for hierarchical perception in ways that you can hardly possibly imagine. Even our ability to rank order a set of objects seems to be tightly linked to our ability to assess the relative status of people in our social milieus. So, and the biochemistry is very, very similar. And the reason we know that is because most of the drugs that are used on people are first tested on animals. Now, it's not often animals as primitive as lobsters, but it is plenty. So a lot of what we know about neurological structure, for example, is a consequence of studying the flatworm, which is a much more primitive organism than the lobster. Continuity is the rule.
Okay, so what can we learn from killer whales that live in matriarchal pods, often led by a grandmother, someone who's been through a menopause? Why isn't that an example that you've picked to talk about in the book? It's because lobsters say the thing that ideologically you want to talk about, which is your belief that there is a kind of Marxist ideology
How do
sweeping.
lobsters say that? The point that I was making with lobsters, I just said what it was. that hierarchies have been around for a
But
very
who
long time.
genuinely, really, today is arguing, apart from maybe 3 mad Marxist academics, that there is no such thing as hierarchy? Hierarchies,
They're not
don't
arguing
exist.
that there's no such thing as hierarchy.
or there
They're
should be no
arguing
such
that-
thing as hierarchies.
Oh, there plenty of them are arguing that.
Really? Because I see that almost never in the wild as an argument. I see people saying that hierarchy should be based on merit and
What
they
do
should
you
be
think?
more
What do you
equal.
think the demand for equality of outcome is if it's not an attempt to flatten hierarchies or to eliminate them? What else could it possibly be? And you don't think the neo-Marxists and the postmodernists think that hierarchy is a social construction? Like, you're not talking about the same people that I know, that's
Right.
for sure.
But this-
Everything's a social construction for the social constructionists, including hierarchies.
But I just don't think that is a very widely held view in the world. It might be among
It's
liberal arts universities.
20% of social scientists identify as Marxist. And the
Where's that statistic from?
look it up in Height's work.
Okay.
You-
Well,
you
I know,
go
I
look
mean,
it up,
I'm
go look
interested.
it
I
up.
know.
I've checked it out quite
Yeah,
carefully.
yeah, but
It's a perfectly valid statistic. I don't have the reference at hand.
Yeah.
So it's 1 in 5. Okay, and the number of conservatives, or even liberals for that matter, in the social sciences and humanities is not only vanishingly small, but getting smaller. And you think the social constructionists believe that hierarchy is built into biology? They're not very good social constructionists if that's what they believe. And the postmodernists and the neo-Marxists are radical social constructionists because they wouldn't believe that human beings are infinitely malleable and that we can be recreated in whatever image the ideologues might want to recreate us in if they didn't think that. And it's much more prevalent than you're admitting. I mean, there isn't a competing position on campuses except among the evolutionary biologists and the evolutionary psychologists, let's say, and they're under complete attack. They're certainly next on the chopping block as far as I can tell. I've been warning them for the last 2 years. Social constructionists don't like evolutionary psychologists and they don't like biology. And I really don't understand why, except that it interferes with this idea that human beings are infinitely malleable and stops them from being able to blame hierarchy on the West. Look, if you're really concerned about the poor, as a social democrat, let's say, the first thing you should do is abandon your presupposition that the dispossession produced by hierarchies is a consequence of the patriarchal structure of the West. It's a way deeper problem than that. So there have been people who've been dispossessed forever, way before capitalism.
Okay, I think I would agree with that. So if it is a way deeper problem than that, how do you tackle it?
I don't know.
Well, that's a bit, I mean, that, for someone as intelligent as you that just throw their hands up and go, ooh, maybe some
There's
people are
lots
just
of things I don't know how to tackle. I don't know how to tackle the fact that people range extremely widely in their cognitive ability either. These are big problems.
Right, but we could start with a redistributive tax policy, right, where people who earn a lot pay more tax than people lower down the income scale to redistribute income. That was a fairly obvious way that you could make poor people less poor. It's something that, you know, the Labour government did. They almost, I think they halved child poverty. It is possible to do things, and we do have mechanisms.
Well, I
work.
wouldn't make the immediate presumption that it was the redistributive tax policy that halved child poverty. You know, that absolute poverty in the world has halved between the year 2000 and 2012, and you can't attribute that to redistributive policies.
No, I can't. I'm only talking about Britain. I'm talking about that particular government, which had, you know, then there are fiscal analyses that have been done. But I think, let's move on from lobsters. I mean, you know.
That chapter is about people becoming responsible and competent, not about them becoming like dominant and powerful.
Okay,
it's
no,
not that at all.
But my problem with it is I think you got criticised by a lot of marine biologists, right, and by a lot of geneticists
I think
for
one.
it. Okay, well, I can name it. P.Z. Myers is one who's criticised you. Adam Rutherford, who's former editor of Nature, has criticised that chapter. There are, you know, that is not. But what I think is fascinating is that
biologists dispute the fact that most organisms organize themselves into hierarchies, and that the fundamental biological mechanism for the regulation of hierarchy is the serotonin system. That's not disputable. Now, you can find animal organizational structures that vary from that, what would you call it, fundamental pattern. But the existence of variance isn't proof against the existence of a fundamental pattern. Like, I don't know how you can sit there and be skeptical about this. If you know the literature on hierarchical structure, you understand that across the entire animal kingdom, animals tend to organize themselves into hierarchies.
But
and that
very,
and
right.
that the neurochemistry
But
of
very
the hierarchy
different
is
types of
serotonergic.
hierarchies, right? So
Well, there's a
you
pattern.
have in
That's
chimps,
why we know they're hierarchies.
Right. Yeah, but like you say, the pattern as if that, you know,
The hierarchy is the pattern.
Right, okay, and that's fine. So chimps have one very obvious social structure and bonobos have another
It's not
one.
as different as people have made it out to be.
No.
The bonobos are a lot more violent than the
Right,
than
and they're
the,
not hippie monkeys,
Rousseauian
right?
observers of the bonobos have admitted.
Okay, but nonetheless, you say that as if those little details don't matter, as if there can't be such a thing as a hierarchy that is much worse than another hierarchy. That's my
I'm
problem
not
with
saying
it.
that at all. There's clearly hierarchies that are worse than other hierarchies.
Right.
Baboons have terrible hierarchies, for example.
And I'm saying-
tyrannical hierarchies aren't my cup of tea.
Right.
That isn't the point I was making.
No.
The point I was making was that hierarchies can't be blamed on capitalism or the West. They're built into our biology. The neurochemistry is so old that we share it with crustaceans, so that's 1/3 of a billion years, which is the proof that hierarchies aren't a recent construct. If proof like that needs to be provided, and that the best way for people to adopt a strategy that will move them up the hierarchy, which is a desirable thing in most regards, is to face the suffering of the world forthrightly. That's what that chapter is about. And the people who've been criticizing it read it as if it's a defense of the Western patriarchy. It's like there's no defense of the Western patriarchy.
I don't think
in
that's true. I think the way that people
chapter.
criticize it is and I think this happens a lot with evolutionary psychology, is which is not quite what the lobsters are, but is where other stuff in the book is. Other things you said, for example, like women wear rouge because it reminds men of ripe fruit. Right. Well, for a start,
Well, why do you think women wear rouge?
I have absolutely no idea. But
Right,
I will tell you.
That's really not. Why
Start.
do you think women wear rouge?
Reminds men of ripe fruit. Right. Well, for a
Well, why
start,
do you think women wear rouge?
I have absolutely no idea. But
Right,
I will tell you.
That's really not a very good answer.
Well, yeah, you said before there were lots of things you don't know the answer to, but I'll tell you
Yeah,
one
but
thing.
I'm not
Most
criticizing your perspective on this. You're criticizing mine, so I'm presuming
Okay,
you
but let
have
me-
an alternative idea. Why do you think women wear makeup? Why do
I
you
think there are an
they wear
enormous
makeup?
number. Let's go back to why women wear rouge, because it reminds men of ripe fruit. Okay, first of all, not all ripe fruit is red. Why would you
You know,
want?
we
Do you
evolved
want
color vision to detect ripe fruit.
Do you want to eat women? No, I think unless men are having sex
You
with
might
ripe
want to
fruit,
taste them.
that's not really where. And where is the evidence that women who are redder in the cheeks have more offspring?
What do you think happens during
But
the
that's-
sexual flush?
But that's the key point, isn't it? Is that you would expect, actually, if this is a sexual selection, that women who are
Yeah, one of
redder
the
would have
hallmarks
more
of you-
children.
one of
We
the
would get
hallmarks of-
progressively redder
One
over
of
time.
the hallmarks of youthful skin is the proclivity for it to flush red. And yes, youthful women have more children. It's a primary sign of fertility.
That, I think you're using.
Wait a second here. What do you think women wear makeup for? Come on, if you're going to go after me on this,
Okay.
let's women. People say, well, women wear makeup to feel better about themselves. It's not a very deep analysis. Why makeup?
I'll tell
Why
you-
facial makeup?
I'll tell you why I wear makeup,
Mm-hmm.
which is to stop the comments that I would get if I didn't wear makeup. And my gender, I always say my gender is low maintenance, right? I don't feel particularly like a woman inside. I don't really know what that would mean. But what I try and do is try and look, you know, in the same way that you get black women who talk about the problem with natural hair, is it's seen as unprofessional, right? And as a woman, if you don't wear makeup, that is seen as a political choice. That is seen as something that, you know, you are.
So you wear makeup to protect yourself from what?
From
tyrannical
judgment.
men.
No, but and tyrannical women as well, I would say. I think women very harshly judge each other's appearance, and there are very good reasons for that. But
Probably because they've learned that from oppressive men.
no, I don't think so. I don't.
And
think
why
that-
do you think it is then?
I think that women are encouraged to be seen as being in competition with each other.
encouraged. You don't think that there's anything about that that's natural, eh?
Well, I would be reluctant to get into that because I think you could talk about intrasexual competition. I think that's a very big deal among the social sciences and evolutionary science. It's not my particular competence. But yeah, I wouldn't. My conception of the patriarchy is not that men are beastly to women. It is that there is a structure in which women participate too that overall privileges and benefits men in order to control female reproduction. And I think those are two very different things. You write it and benefits men in order to control female reproduction. And I think those are two very different things. You write in 12 Rules that you skipped a grade in school and you were small for your age. Do you think that shaped your personality and your experiences of life?
Well, it did to some degree. Made it difficult for me to participate in sports. So I didn't really do anything that was fundamentally athletic till I was in graduate school. So my parents are guilty about that because they felt that it wasn't good for me, but I'm not unhappy about it. I got through school faster. I wasn't a fan of school, and the faster I got through it, the better. I think it might have encouraged me to do two other things, which was I probably hung around with rougher kids that I might have otherwise, partly as a compensation, I suppose, for being smart and academically able and also small. So I probably exaggerated my roughness, I suppose. And it made me more capable of verbally defending myself. But other than that, I don't think it had much of an effect. I think I pretty much left all of that behind.
That's very good. Also, the other thing I was really interested to read was that you married your teenage sweetheart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I met her when I was 8. So we've known each other for 50 years, yeah.
So this is, I think, really fascinating. So I read that and I thought that was quite moving. And then I was reading the bit about, the animal kingdom, and the bit for you take away from the lobster section is that, what happens if you're top lobster is that you get to impregnate all the females. That's as being evolutionary successful as a lobster, right?
Mm-hmm. That's proclivity towards polygamy, which is one of the things that pulls on human society.
Right, and you're now the pretty big lobster. And yet you are monogamous, you're faithful to your wife, you don't want to go around impregnating every woman that you see, right?
No, one woman's enough trouble.
Right, so I think that's to me that was really interesting because that's a way in which we are very obviously very different from animal society, and to me
well,
it
we're
takes...
not that different. I mean, there are plenty of societies where exactly that happens.
Right, but
So
you've been able to overcome that biological urge, right? And so in the sense that maybe there are other biological urges, such as men's propensity towards violence, that might also be overcome.
Well, it's not self-evident that you want it to be overcome. I mean, you don't know what goes along with it. I mean, obviously, first of all, defining violence isn't that straightforward. How about use of force in self-defense? Does that constitute violence?
I think to me that's a separate category of violence. I think
Well,
self-defense...
but it's not that easy to distinguish them. Like if what you want to do with a child who's aggressive is socialize them so that they become sophisticated in their manifestation of their aggression. You don't want to inhibit it. You certainly don't want to socialize little boys to be more like little girls. That's, first of all, you don't know how to do it to begin with, but second of all, it's not very, it's not an advisable strategy. So,
well, I found that really interesting, because in the book you say that actually if you feminize men, that might give them more of a, might have more of an allure towards, these very fascistic
oh, there's
ideologies.
no doubt about that. That's standard psychoanalytic. That's like psychoanalysis 101. If you repress something, it comes back with a vengeance.
Okay, so tell me what you mean by feminizing in that sense. Because to me, if you don't mind me saying so, you are a man who is quite feminine. You're in touch with your feminine side. You are very well dressed. You talk a lot about your diet. You've talked about your emotions.
I hate talking about my diet.
Right, but you well dressed. You talk a lot about your diet. You've talked about your emotions.
I hate talking about my diet.
Right, but you cry in public. You enjoy spending time with your kids. All of these things that are not
sad, isn't it?
But they're not stereotypically male, and I think that's very admirable.
Pretty strange behavior for a patriarchal tyrant.
Well, that's why I think that you're probably, in some ways, you're not a patriarchal tyrant, or that actually all of our programming, if you want to call it that in biology, is overcomable, because you are...
It's integratable.
Right, but you are a man who some people would say has a lot of feminine traits like that, and I don't... Do you think that means that you are now being in the allure of authoritarian fascistic ideologies because you're baking cakes?
Oh, I notice the allure.
And then what do you do with that?
Work to live such that there's no temptation in that, which is also what I recommend to everyone else.
Right.
If you see any temptation in that, then you should straighten yourself up real quick. So, and that's what I've done for decades. So of course you have to see the allure in that. If you don't see the allure in it, you're a fool. Just like if you don't see the allure in the radical leftist ideas. I mean, if they didn't have, if you didn't understand the allure, you couldn't understand the ideas. They're dangerously alluring. It'd be lovely if there was a strong man who could solve all our problems, and those who deserved it got exactly what was coming to them. It's not something that I would recommend as a wish. So, but that doesn't mean you want to be blind to its attraction. You want to see what the dark parts of you are attracted to. It helps you keep an eye on where things can go if they go badly sideways. So I don't think it has anything to do, though, with my, what would you say, more classically feminine interests. Not as far as I can tell. I mean, I have all sorts of classically masculine interests too, so
right, and
it seems to be reasonably well balanced.
Right, so you talk then about we shouldn't socialise little boys like little girls, but actually, I have lots of stereotypes. I'm interested in politics, which is overwhelmingly male-dominated. You have lots of classically feminine interests. Why, what is the problem here with people having personalities that are a mixture?
There's no problem with that at all. The problem is when it's dictated by fiat.
Well, I mean, who's fiat?
How about the education system?
So in schools, you think that there is that.
Well, I
Wow, mein Mikrofon war nicht eingesteckt. Ich hole mal ganz fast mal ein TikTok-Video und schau was. So. Mein Mic war unplugged. Also nicht eingesteckt. Jetzt. Oh nee. Warte mal. Ja, Mann. Oh. So ein kleines Detail, was so einen Unterschied macht. Ach du Scheiße. Ich schwör's euch. Ich nerv zu Tode, wenn es was so rumrutscht wie Scheiße. So, ich sehe jetzt mein Upload. Er dauert doch gerade ein bisschen schwierig. Heißt. Dass wir einfach abbrechen.
Outline, I can't remember the psychologist's name at the moment, but he was quite influential in the 1980s, who recommended as a control for male violence that boys be socialized more like little girls. And I don't think that that's a particularly unpopular viewpoint. So on the de-emphasis on competition, for example, in games, the increase in the rise of competitive games where scores aren't kept, that sort of thing, is all a manifestation of that kind of theory as far as I'm concerned. The idea that there's something intrinsically wrong with competition. It's a very foolish idea, especially if you want to motivate relatively aggressive boys, because they're competitive. Well, competition, that's not good. Someone has to lose. It's like, well, you're not going to get very far looking at the world that way, I'm afraid. You know, maybe you want to generate a plethora of games so that everybody has a shot at winning. That's a good idea, but you certainly don't want to devalue the notion of winning. If you're doing something necessary, you should reward people who are particularly good at it. It's part of the definition of it being necessary. So, and you don't want to control aggression any more than you want to control sex. You want to integrate it. And if it's integrated, that's the integration of the shadow from the Jungian perspective, and something I talk a lot about in my lectures. It's like you need to have the capacity for danger. You need to be dangerous, but you need to learn how to not use it except when it's necessary. And that is not the same as being harmless. Harmless, that's a terrible virtue. It's like a rabbit. There's nothing virtuous about harmlessness. It just means you're ineffectual.
Yeah, I think I would agree. Well, I think there are some people who through their harmlessness become iconic and they become symbols. I think the Gandhi and the principle of non-violence.
He's not harmless. He just transcended his deep violence. That is a completely different thing.
Okay.
Without that capacity, violence, that is a completely different thing.
Okay.
Without that capacity, there would have been no way he would have had the strength of character that he had. He was an integrated person, not a harmless person.
Okay.
That's a very, very different thing.
Did you have different ambitions for your daughter and for your son?
Some of them were different. I encouraged my daughter in her desire to be a mother, which is not something I did with my son.
Did you encourage him in his desire to be a father?
Absolutely.
Right. So you encourage both of them to be a parent.
Right, but those are different.
Yeah.
So
I believe.
and yeah, I mean,
Okay.
and in some sense, I think it's harder for young women because, of course, the problem of integrating family with career is a more complex problem for women to solve. So, and I spent a lot of time talking to her about how she might solve that. I wouldn't say that we came up with anything that was spectacularly original or successful, but I at least let her know that whatever pathway she chose was fine with me as long as she was being honest with herself about what it was that she wanted. But also that, I'm not a fan of the idea that the most fundamental orientation that a person is likely to have in their life is career. I don't believe that's true for most people. I certainly don't believe it's true for most women. And I think the evidence supports that claim quite straightforwardly. So,
however, it is the only thing that you get paid for under capitalism. Right?
Man, live.
But that's
How can
true.
you say something like that?
Paid-
It's so cliched.
Well,
it's so painful to hear that.
It may be cliche, but it nonetheless is true, right?
Look,
Women do
it's
more,
not
much
capitalism.
Well,
for God's sake.
It is.
No, it isn't. You have to invest into a child for 18 years before they have any economic utility.
Mm-hmm.
It's a consequence of delayed economic utility. We don't know how to monetize it. It's not a consequence of capitalism. It's a consequence of the fact that human beings have an 18-year dependency. How do you monetize that, even in principle?
Well,
we don't know.
We did used to send them up chimneys, to be fair. And at that point,
Well,
what's
true.
really interesting is at that point, children were seen as being much more the property of the man. At that point,
Well, true. In principle.
Well,
We don't know.
we did used to send them up chimneys, to be fair, and at that point,
Well,
what's
true.
really interesting is at that point, children were seen as being much more the property of the man, and as they become economically useless, all the legal studies show that that's when we start moving to a model of female custody, right? Because it was about caring labour. But this is the point I'm making: is
A
that
model. Look, I'll tell you, there are plenty of men who are not very happy about the model of female custody, and that would
Yes,
and
that
that
is
would
true.
include the, what is it, 85% of men who are essentially denied 50-50 custody when they divorce and have young children. So I wouldn't think that one of our major problems, or at least a major unidimensional problem, is the proclivity of men to foist off the custody of their children onto women. There's certainly another side of that argument.
there is, and I do think that actually a lot of anger has been generated by the way we have in Britain anyway, or England and Wales, we have an adversarial fault-based divorce system, and that's something that's changing. But what it does is encourage people to come in on day one and say, if you want to get divorced, you're going to have to make out a case that the other person has been a bastard.
It doesn't
to you.
matter, because if you move to a non-fault-based divorce system, then all that happens is the fault shifts to who should get custody. So it doesn't remove the acrimony by any stretch of the imagination. It just shifts it to custody of the children.
And
That's
but-
what's happened in Canada.
Right, and in Britain we actually talk about access rather than custody, because it's the idea is not that you own the children, it's that you actually want to be able to see the children and spend time with them, and I think that's really important. But fault-based divorce is something that increases the chances of couples having a bad divorce, right? That's the problem, is it sets people against each other from the start. They have to go into court and contest that the other person has done something wrong, which is not a great base on which to start then an argument about
You
what
think
you're
people
going to settle.
should be encouraged to divorce even if no one's done anything wrong?
No, I think that having to prove that in a court of law is not something that is going to lead you to a better arbitration about settling money and settling, access to children. I think that's the point. You have a ridiculous situation where couples who say, actually, we've just grown apart, nonetheless, unless they want to wait 5 years or 2 years for separation, they have to go in and plead unreasonable behaviour to get a divorce and start splitting up their assets. That's the joy of no-fault divorce, is that you don't have to make those contested cases. You can simply say, our marriage is no longer working, and part ways without going into all of that acrimony. That seems quite sensible to me.
It also seems quite naive to me.
Well,
I've seen very few non-acrimonious divorces. They're very hard on kids. So I don't think anything that makes them easier is a very good idea. It might be good in the short term, but it's not good in the long term.
But
Unless you don't think that marriage is a useful institution. And if you think that it's part of the patriarchal tyranny, then you might think that as well. So, but it's a very useful institution, mostly for kids. So
I agree that I'm married. Modern marriage has a lot to recommend it. I do also think it is.
Heute machen wir mal wieder Instagram-Bewertung. Ich habe einen Verwandten, der ist Pascal. Ist ja gerade macht Wahlstatt. Ach du Scheiße. Ja, eure beste Freunde, wie cringe. Oh damn. Only get to wear logs. Oh, mein Look und zwar immer Sub. Das ist ein geiles Bild, Alter. Das ist ein geiles Bild. Kenn ich nicht. Und du gönnst sich Subway, wie ich sehe. Ja. Geil. Das ist cool. Help. Help. Cringe. Nicht mal getaggt, wer die andere Person ist, Mann. Oh my god. Oh hell no, dude. The fuck's wrong? Cringe. Cringe. There are times. There are times. Der Thüler. Thüler. Der Thüler. Thüler. Ach, der Thüler ist. Der Tyler ist auch ein guter. Der Thüler. Janik ist auch ein guter, definitiv. Ja. Aber inzwischen der ist 15, nicht mehr 14. There are times. There are times. Leonie. Oh shit. Bin ich jetzt hier schon wieder gelandet? So. Guess, das ist die Leonie von uns. Wie Mamu Moritz. Instagram. Das ist eine sehr gute Website hier. There are times. There are times. There are times. Fuck, was hält denn da jetzt in der Hand? Moritz. Ein Abschlusszeugnis. Hauptschule. War ich auch. Durch eine Realschule mache jetzt bei mir und sowas. Mi. Alina. Welche Alina ist denn das? Alter, ich hab doch keine Ahnung. Ist es die? Cringe. Es ist cringe. Es ist cringe. Ba, 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 ba. Ach du Scheiße. Ach du Scheiße. Oh man, mal einen scheiß Privataccount. Das ist ja so ein 2016 Shit, Alter. Oh, weiß ich nicht, Mann. Oh shit. So. Lass uns das Bild viewen. 13 Posts? 13 Posts? Sicher? Sollte nicht allzu schwer sein, drumherum zu kommen, hä? Jo. Search. Hey, yo, was ist mit der scheiß Suchleiste hier unten los, Mann? Scheiß drauf. So. nicht sehr gut. Ich glaube 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 10, auch von der Anzahl her passt nicht. Search. Der sieht irgendwie viel mehr legit aus. I guess ist doch nicht so einfach, ha? Hm. Das ist ja cool. Sieht mir ein bisschen zu legit aus mit dem Curl minus S minus O. Jo, mein neues TikTok hat Instant Dings bekommen. Auch wieder hier ist es fake. Interessant. Ich finde es super interessant.
Smash or pass forearm exercises. First up, we've got the one.
Ziemlich lame.
Honestly, you probably do enough gripping when you sit there choking the chicken at night crying alone in bed. Honestly, they can fuck off. Pass. Barbell wrist curls. Honestly, it's a solid choice. It isn't going to let you down. Smash. But what about number 3? Barbell holds. Hey, you better not say anything bad about them. I love them. Well, listen. Isometric contractions are inferior for muscle growth, so you do them if you want to, but they're going in the fucking bin. Pass. Smash or pass forearm exercises. First up, we've got the one and only hand gripper. Honestly, you probably do enough gripping when you sit there choking the chicken at night crying alone in bed. Honestly, they can fuck off. Pass. Barbell wrist curls. Honestly, it's a solid choice. It isn't gonna let you down. Smash.
Can you view private account on Instagram without following? If the Instagram account is public, then the profile and posts can be seen by anyone, on or off Instagram, even if they don't have an Instagram account. While the private Instagram account, only the followers you approve can see what you share, including your photos or videos on hashtag and location pages, and your followers and following lists. Now the question is, what if you want to view a private Instagram profile without following a person? Or you might want to view followers of a private Instagram account. If you search private Instagram viewer on Google, you'll find tons of websites claiming they can help you take a peek at anyone's profile. Please do not use any of these websites or tools, as all the private Instagram viewers are 100% a scam. They pretend to be a search engine, but when you click search you must complete a human verification, which is mostly surveys, so the website can make money from you. No matter how many surveys you have completed, at the end you'll see nothing. So, how to view private Instagram account? The answer is quite simple. If someone has a private Instagram profile and you want to view it, the only way to do so is by submitting a follower request. Tap the blue follow button on the user's profile.
This video is all about viewing private. First thing first, let's start with private Instagram account pictures. So first learn how to view the private account profile picture of any Instagram user. And by the way, watch the entire video to know more. First, take a look at the private Instagram account's username whose profile picture you want to view, and note it down or simply copy it to the clipboard. After that, open any web browser on your phone and visit instadp.com.
Ja, ich liebe immer diese geilen.
Here, you basically have to enter the username. Then, once you find the exact Instagram account, simply tap full size, and this will open the profile picture of the private Instagram account. So simply screenshot this or tap download to save it to your phone. I have already created a detailed step-by-step video tutorial about this. I have linked out to that video in the card above so that you may also watch. Well, this is how you can view profile pictures of private Instagram accounts only. But what if you want to view private posts, photos and videos as well? Keep watching. There are many articles. I released a video about Instagram pictures.
Geht nicht. Yep, die funktioniert noch nicht. Da
It
bin
is a
ich direkt ziemlich
patriarchal
minus.
institution. It is literally
Of
why.
course you think that.
Well-
because you think virtually everything that occurs in our society is a patriarchal institution. And it's easy to think that because then you only have to think one thing.
You could
have a
let-
one thing answer for everything.
You could
It's
let
like
me-
it's part of the patriarchal institution.
I don't think
It's
you're
like-
obeying the rule that says maybe treat people as if they have something worth hearing. So
I'm not making a case for the patriarchal tyranny.
I'm gonna
and
make
I
it-
don't think you are either. I think that you're making a case that's like a universally cliched case for the patriarchal tyranny. I don't see too
Why
much
do
of you
women change
reflected
their
in your
names?
articles at all.
why do women change their names on marriage traditionally?
I don't know. Exactly. Why do you think they do?
Because it was to symbolize the transfer of their ownership from one family to another family. That's why in The Handmaid's Tale you have off Warren,
Oh
off Glenn.
God, Margaret Atwood. Well, she was just about devoured by the feminists last year, so that was something interesting to observe.
I think she made a very good point. She wasn't devoured by all feminists. I'm a feminist. I thought what she said about due process in cases like that is perfectly reasonable.
Well, many people didn't.
No, but then, guess what? This is on the internet. You can find someone who disagrees with pretty much anything. But so why do you think women change their names when they get married traditionally? If it's not about transfer of property ownership traditionally?
I don't know if I have an opinion about that. The specific reasons for that, I'd have to look into it for a fair amount of time before I decided it, but I certainly wouldn't boil it down to a unidimensional argument about the ownership of women by men. So,
Okay.
I mean, the part of the problem too is with this sort of discussion is that it's, and this is why I consider it a manifestation of ideological possession. It's predictable.
Well, that's what
knowing your
but
stance on.
But having a coherent ideology does mean that it is predictable because
you don't need an ideology.
It is one logical thing that flows from another, and all those pieces tessellate together. So what I find very interesting about your thinking, I find it quite slightly baffling, is that I don't really see how all the pieces fit together. You say that you're not, you believe in God, but there's a lot of emphasis about
No, I
going back
actually
to...
say I act as if God exists.
Right. But,
which is actually my definition of belief.
Okay, but that then doesn't, to me, tessellate very obviously with your insistence that we know actually it's just about pure science and there's not a, because I can see...
What insistence that it's just about pure science?
Well,
I wrote Maps of Meaning. There's no insistence in that it's just about pure science.
Okay, but you make appeals to
science.
What I mean is,
different.
You make appeals to science all the time. You say, well, this is what the literature says. And the trouble with God is that ultimately you can't say this is what the literature says. There is no literature.
Which is why I don't say
belief.
anything about the scientific status of God, apart from what can be experienced maybe under certain conditions of what would you call chemical-induced mysticism, which seems to be something that you can say something scientifically about. But I see that there's two different realms, right? There's a realm of values and a realm of facts. And in the realm of facts, science reigns supreme. But it doesn't in the realm of values. You have to look elsewhere. That was what the humanities were for, before they got, what would you say, hijacked by ideologues. And the idea that something should be consistent. You were talking about the necessity for consistency in ideology. It's like, I'm not hearing what you think. I'm hearing how you're able to represent the ideology you were taught. And it's not that interesting because I don't know anything about you. I could replace you with someone else who thinks the same way. And that means you're not here. That's what it means. It's not pleasant. So you're not integrating the specifics of your personal experience with what you've been taught to synthesize something that's genuine and surprising and engaging in a narrative sense as a consequence. And that's the pathology of ideological possession. It's not good. And it's not good that I know where you stand on things. Once I know a few things, it's like, why have a conversation? I already know where you stand on things.
I bet you don't know where I stand on all things.
I would hope that was true.
Okay, let's talk about transgender issues. That's fun. What do you think I think about transgender issues?
I suspect that you think that gender expression, gender identity are fundamentally social constructs, but I could be wrong.
No, I believe that there are definitely some biological differences between the sexes. We've observed them. I do believe that gender is a hugely powerful social structure that we've built on top of that it is long.
Easy to do, and it is going to turn your arms from these long skinny peens to these veiny Danny D dominators. First up, we're starting with my favourite exercise, which is the incline dumbbell curl. Not only is this exercise insanely effective at growing the biceps, but it also feels amazing, like coming in the woman. Next up, we got the hammer curl. Now, this will always be in my arm work no matter what. It gives you the thickness on the biceps, it gives you the thickness on the forearms, it just gives you that really dominant look on your arms, like you mean business, just like this young man right here. Last but not least, we're going for a dumbbell preach curl. Now, this is simple to set up. You just get a bench, put it on an incline, and just stand at the back of it and just curl. It's so easy to set up, and it...
Hey Coach, wie bekomme ich einen dicken Bizeps? Am besten mit mir zusammen trainieren. Einfach ballern. Erste Übung Scott Curls. Ellbogen vor dem Körper. Hier 8 bis 10 Wiederholungen. Alles was geht. Bam. Richtig schwer, aber richtig. Come on. Hier, come on. 7. Komm. Ja, nimm uns was, komm.
Ballen bringe ich am weitesten.
Jetzt sauber bleiben, mit dem Bizeps, Komm, zieh. Jawohl, schön.
Einer noch.
Oh.
Top G.
Du ne dolle Wiede.
Top G.
Du ne dolle Wiede.
I get a craving for a taco, so here we are. I added some barbecue sauce to some leftover braised beef that I had, and mixed that up before adding it to a nacho seasoned taco shell. Then I hit it with some chipotle sour cream, pickled onions, and a little shredded lettuce before absolutely demolishing.
You spend a lot of money on skincare products, just hold on. Just go buy Head & Shoulders and wash your face with it and see what happens.
For context, I'm 23, I'm not a teenager, and I work in skincare. And my face looks like this. It's the worst that it's ever been. It wasn't this bad in high school, but I also have always had like forehead bumps. So I'm gonna stitch this in like a couple weeks. I'm gonna try this out, and I will let you guys know if it actually works.
You spend a lot of money on skincare products, just hold on. Just go buy Head & Shoulders and wash your face with it and see what happens.
For context, I'm 23.
Hier seht ihr was ganz Furchtbares. Biomasse wird sinnlos irgendwo hingekippt und die Wärme verdampft einfach, ohne sie zu nutzen. Wenn es nicht regnen würde, könntet ihr meine Tränen sehen. Wir könnten Kindergärten, Altenheim, Schulen, Krankenhäuser damit kostenlos heizen, aber niemand würde daran Geld verdienen. Deswegen liegt sie hier einfach rum und verliert ungenutzt ihre Wärme. Nichts macht mich trauriger.
Wir kriegen jetzt unsere Englischarbeit zurück. Mal gucken, was wir haben.
Und
Ich denke, es ist eine 5 oder 4. Eine 4, war klar.
It would be if it was not now halfway down.
Largely, but not entirely, socially constructive. I think when you look back through the history, you know, biological differences.
I've got about 140 pounds on each side, trying to keep it heavy during my cut. You guys consider this a heavy weight, a decent weight? What do you guys think? Got about 140 pounds on each side, trying to keep it heavy during my cut. You guys consider this a heavy weight?
Oh, what are we? We are dating now. I want to be your boyfriend and I want you to be my girlfriend. I want that too. Alright, sweet and simple, man. This is shit I'm talking about. Oh, what are
Hallo, wie ist denn Shisha-Wein? 3 Gramm Chunky ersetzt 50 Gramm Zucker, was ein absoluter Gamechanger ist, wenn man abnehmen sich gesund ernähren möchte. Wo fange ich da an? 7,5 Milliliter von diesem Süßstoff entsprechen 100 Gramm Zucker und die Flasche kostet 79 Cent, hält gefühlt ein Jahr. Das Chunky kostet ganze 17,90 €. Ich süße da lieber mit Proteinpulver, da habe ich wenigstens einen Effekt. Zweitens zum Thema Gesundheit. In dem Chunky ist Sucralose drin. Es gibt immer mehr Studien, die zeigen, dass Sucralose nicht das Gesündeste für unseren Körper ist.
Ich hatte von so einem richtig geilen Green Book. Green Book hieß der Film. Ich gehe jetzt offline schauen den Film. Es tut mir so derbe leid. Green Book. Ich schau mal auf ganz egal Seiten, ob es den da gibt. Glauben Sie, dass ich Ihnen das abkaufe, dass es ihn hier nicht gibt? Sie lügen doch. Mein Netflix lädt einfach gar nicht, Alter. Es hat jetzt nicht einen Links dazu. Hopp, los! Ja. Oh. Glauben Sie, dass ich Ihnen Zodiac abkaufe? Green hier. Eine besondere Freundschaft. Okay. Hier gibt es auf jeden Fall nett. Das halt Alternativen gesucht. Hab ihn. Bei der Zeit muss halt schon sehr genau. Legalized anabolic steroids. Just one step. Benutze eben die Streamkiste. Jetzt liegt an mir. Ja, hier. Oha. Ich habe die Seite ganz anders in Erinnerung. FOE als Stream. Oha.